محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل Muhammad. Oh, dear brothers and respected sisters who are listening, Salamun Alaikum. Inshallah, the plan is to keep discussing some of the lessons from Risalatul Huquq, this very important hadith from the fourth Imam alayhi salam. In the sessions we had prior to the nights of Qadr, we spoke a little bit about this hadith and how this is a very special hadith, that it talks about 50 different huquq, meaning responsibilities essentially that a believer has. And so this one hadith, which seems to have been a letter that the Imam wrote himself, this one hadith, it shows us how to be a servant of Allah. We have responsibilities that encompass many different aspects of our life. There is the right of our different body parts, our eyes, our tongue, our hands, our feet. There's the right of different acts of worship, prayer, fasting, hajj, sadaqah. And then the bulk of the hadith are people that we interact with in society. What is the right of our father, the right of our mother, the right of our child, the right of our friend? And today, inshallah, we wanted to talk a little bit about the right of the elderly and the youngsters. So two of the huquq that are mentioned towards the end of this hadith are exactly that, the right of the elderly and then the right of the youngster. So initially, let's start by looking at the hadith, the text of the hadith with regards to the right of the elderly. It says, "And as for the right of the elderly, his right is that you respect his age, his old age, and honor him due to his Islam." I'll come back to this point, just let's read it for now. "If he was someone of merit in Islam due to his outstanding past, then give him preference in all states and do not confront him by quarreling, by fighting with him." Okay, a couple of the points that we can take out of this initial part of the hadith, the right of the elderly, is that in Islam, the elderly people, older people, are supposed to be respected regardless of other criteria, other situations, other issues. Even this point about them being Muslim, if we look, initially he said his right is that you respect his old age. And so we have this in Islam as a value, as a quality, that we should respect the elderly regardless of how pious they may be, how strong their belief may be. For example, we have that the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he would send off a military expedition, when he would send the Muslim army to go fight, he would give them some advice. He would say, like, set off in the name of Allah, in the path of Allah, but then he would tell them some Islamic values to keep in mind during the warfare. He would tell them, do not mutilate the bodies of those people that you kill in battle. Do not do this, do not do that. One of the things he would say was, do not kill the elderly or the young children or the women. That just because there is warfare happening, that doesn't give you the license to go beyond the limit of fighting the enemy soldiers. So this is one thing, that in Islam we have this idea of certain people, our parents, elderly people, we have to respect them unconditionally. But that doesn't mean that there is no difference if they are themselves people of merit. Okay, so the hadith then went on to say that if he was someone of merit in Islam, then give him preference. So see, there is also something to be said. There is also some additional merit that comes about when somebody is practicing, has taqwa, has other values in their life. That adds to the respect that they deserve. So this is an important point to keep in mind, that on the one hand, an elderly individual in the Islamic outlook should be respected regardless, but if they are somebody of taqwa, somebody of merit, somebody who is serving the cause of Islam, then that adds even more of a reason to respect them. So this idea of having an outstanding past, having this idea of having somehow been a Muslim earlier because they are elder, if they were somebody who grew up as a Muslim, then their Islam precedes the youngster. And so that itself gives them a level of merit, that they were obeying Allah, worshipping Allah before this youngster was even born. Okay? But again, we have to keep in mind that that doesn't mean that just because somebody's past was a good past, that they would always be on the right path now. We had people, companions of the Prophet, who had that outstanding merit of serving the Prophet, fighting for the Prophet. But after the death of the Prophet, they betrayed the path of the Prophet. They fought against Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. So for example, one story, it's a well-known story, probably you've heard of it, that once Talha and Zubair, these two eminent companions, some of the early companions who fought with the Prophet, once they came to Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam and they were upset with how Imam Ali alayhi salam would equally distribute the wealth amongst the Muslim Ummah. This was not the practice of the second caliph, the third caliph. The second and third caliph had set about a system where those people who were early Muslims would get extra money, and the recent converts to Islam would get less money. Okay, so you might think that, oh, we just said that, okay, there is a merit to somebody who has been serving Islam longer, who has been a Muslim longer. But no, when it came to distribution of wealth, Imam Ali alayhi salam didn't discriminate in this regard. So Talha and Zubair were very upset. At one point they come to the Imam and they tell him that you have made our share like the share of other people. You have made us equal to those who are not equal to us. Allah favored us. We were the ones who spread Islam. We conquered the Muslim lands. Islam was spread by our sword. And Imam Ali didn't like that at all. He got on the mimbar and he gave a very harsh response to these people. He said that this is one of the things he told them is that this equal distribution is not something I made up. This was the seerah of the Holy Prophet, that he used to do this as well. And this is what Islam wants in this regard. So the point being that we have to somehow strike a balance here, that when it comes to the elderly, we have a responsibility to always respect them, but there is also a merit when that person is himself a believer, is somebody of taqwa. That adds to that respect, and that also makes a difference in our interaction with them. A couple of narrations about the importance of respecting the elderly, and then I want to make one more point here. We have one beautiful hadith that says, "Ash-shaykhu fi ahlihi kan-nabiyyi fi ummatih." Imagine how much respect a prophet would have in his ummah. People would somehow listen to the Prophet, respect the Prophet, obey the Prophet, sacrifice for the Prophet. In a hadith we have that an elderly individual in his family should be like a prophet in his community. That the family should look up to that individual, respect him, listen to him. Another such hadith we have that one of the ways to honor Allah Azza wa Jal is by honoring the white beard of a Muslim, meaning honoring an elderly individual. So one final point I wanted to make about this is that such Islamic teachings remind us of a very beautiful reality, that Islam gives a lot of importance to the family, the strength of the family, and we can say even beyond that, to the social fabric. Islam has a lot of teachings that, in addition to the spiritual dimension, if people adhere to these Islamic teachings, the family would be very strong. The society would be a society that somehow trusts and loves and is there for one another. If we look at, for example, the chastity and modesty that Islam expects from men and women, if somebody is willing to control themselves and only allow themselves to do what is halal, that would strengthen the relationship and the need of a husband and wife for one another. That's one example of it. If we look at all of the Islamic teachings about backbiting and lying, and there's a sin called namima. Namima is when you might be saying something true, but you're causing two friends to become enemies. You're telling one friend that, oh, that other friend, you don't know, he doesn't really like you, he said this bad thing about you. These are all examples of Islamic teachings that if they are only implemented and adhered to, the society would be such a strong society. People would trust one another. People would respect and love and be there for one another. In this regard, I thought I would just quickly mention one such story. There's an important story that happened during the life of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In the 24th chapter of the Quran, called Surah An-Nur, the second page of this chapter is referring to this story. It says, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ جَاءُوا بِالْإِفْكِ عُصْبَةٌ مِّنْكُمْ, that those people who initiated this lie, this calumny, are a group from amongst you. What's this ifk? This incident that happened in history is known as the story of the ifk, from that verse of Quran. We have different accounts in Shia and Sunni books as to which wife of the Prophet this is about. But regardless, the story is that some people, some of the munafiqeen at that time, they tried to accuse one of the wives of the Prophet of having done something very inappropriate and very indecent. And so in defense, and somehow like Allah Ta'ala in these verses of Quran is harshly rebuking the Muslims, that how dare you spread such a false rumor, and without investigating, without looking into whether such a thing really happened, people were talking about it. In one of the verses of the Quran, it says, that same page, second page of Surah An-Nur, it says that, okay, well, when the Muslims, you heard about it, why did not the faithful men and women think good of the others, basically, and say that this is definitely a lie? Why didn't they bring 4 witnesses? Then later on it says, Allah advises you lest you should ever repeat the like of it. Okay, so Allah is like very harshly rebuking the Muslims that this is something very, very big that they did, and they should never do that again. يَعِظُكُمُ اللَّهُ أَن تَعُودُوا لِمِثْلِهِ أَبَدًا. Point being what? The point being that the Muslims allowed a false rumor to circulate. Like I said, the common story we hear about which wife of the Prophet it was, the Shia accounts, we have a different name and not one of the other wives. But anyways, that's not that important. The point is that the Muslims were in trouble. Allah was not happy with them, that they were allowing this false rumor to spread. And so this is just another example of how Islam wants to somehow train families and societies to be a very strong, healthy society. And nowadays, the society we live in, we should recognize that there are a lot of problems because they have left aside divine values. They have left aside chastity and modesty and some of these fundamentals that are needed for the family unit to be strong. And so there are a lot of problems in the modern society, and as Muslims, we shouldn't be always defensive and think that we have to apologize for who we are, and when certain Islamic actions or things that are halal in Islam are not commonly acceptable in this society, we always feel like we need to apologize. No, we should sometimes be very strong and even be ready to somehow say that, look, this other worldview, these other values that have built this society have a lot of problems in them. And Islam is a very strong kind of worldview and values that would lead to a strong family and a strong society. Okay, so that was one point. Let's move on to the next slide. The remaining section of the right of the elderly goes on like this. The one that says tolerance and respect, yeah. Do not arrive. So now the Imam ﷺ is giving examples of how we would respect the elderly. Okay, so we kind of said that we have to respect them regardless, unconditionally. One of the aspects the Imam says, do not arrive at a path before him. Do not walk in front of him. And then do not consider the elderly to be ignorant. Even if they are behaving ignorantly, you should tolerate and respect them. You should tolerate it and respect him due to the right of Islam along with his age. So I kind of mentioned that the general approach that Islam has is that we need to respect the elderly unconditionally, and then if they are pious and religious, then that adds even more merit, that they deserve even more respect. But yeah, these are some examples of what we have in Islamic teachings of how to respect the elderly or how to respect our parents, that we don't walk in front of them, for example. Okay, we have this about our parents as well, that one of the kind of adab, etiquette we should have with our parents is that we should not walk in front of them. So this idea of being humble, that you let your father, for example, you're walking with your father, you allow him to walk first and then you walk behind him. For example, I'll just, in that regard of our father, there's one hadith I wanted to narrate that talks about some of these etiquette of our father, that, or our parents together, that we should have accompany them in a nice manner. Okay, so somebody once asked the sixth Imam that what is the meaning of this verse, one of the verses that talks about doing good to your parents. And so the sixth Imam in a hadith, he's giving examples, like these examples of not walking in front of our parents. A couple of other examples that are there in that other hadith of our parents is that you should not allow your parents to ask you for help with regards to what they need. You should strive to be there and know what they need and take care of their needs and satisfy their needs before they even have to ask you. Another thing is that even if they trouble you, you should not speak back to them. Even if they hit you, you should not respond in kind or do something rude to them. You should do dua for them. See, Islam wants us to, beyond just treating our parents well, to have a heart full of love for our parents and somehow overlook their faults and not harbor an ill feeling to them. Another thing mentioned in this hadith is do not raise your voice. Do not look at your parents with a look other than a look of mercy. To look out of anger or out of rudeness is not allowed in Islam. So these are some of the traits. And one point that's important to keep in mind that I had mentioned in a couple of the earlier sessions is that these kind of akhlaqi recommendations that Islam has given us, it's not just about, so I spoke about the social kind of aspect of it, about how families would be very strong if these kind of Islamic teachings were adhered to. In addition to that, there is a spiritual effect to this, that by tolerating difficulty, we are becoming a patient person. We are developing good akhlaq in our heart. See, how is it that akhlaq means those kind of deep-rooted characteristics we have? Being a patient person, being a generous person, being a brave person, or on the contrary, having bad akhlaq. How is it that akhlaq is formed? One of the main ways that akhlaq is formed is by actions. If somebody is controlling their anger and doing what the Sharia tells them they should do, that is now having a deep effect on their soul. That is purifying their soul. That is developing good traits in their heart. So, on the one hand, for the person who is being tolerant, like let's say in our example of an elderly person, let's say there was a difficult elderly person that the youngster is tolerating, is having patience with. On the one hand, that young individual is developing good akhlaq by doing that. On the other hand, this is the normal way of correcting. Like for many people, if they see that the other person that they're being mean to is having good akhlaq, eventually they will feel bad and they will reform themselves. So this is a kind of very beautiful, very good way to fix relationships, by generally tolerating. Of course, there are limits to that. Let's say there's a very abusive relationship. I'm not saying that always abuse needs to be tolerated unconditionally, but generally this is the path in life. That by showing tolerance, patience, love, it's an opportunity for us to grow as an individual, and inshallah that reforms the other person as well. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. I wanted to also remind brothers and sisters that this is an interactive seminar. If anybody has any questions, feel free to ask, and don't feel that there's like only, certain questions that are okay and I'm not free to ask other kind of questions. No, anything you want to ask. If it's something I can't answer, I won't answer, but don't feel that you are restricted in asking in the first place. But okay, if there are no questions, we can move on to the last discussion I wanted to have today. So we talked a little bit about the right of the elderly. Now we want to move on to the right of the youngsters, of the children. MashaAllah, we have lots of children here. And such rights, and so a good point to keep in mind is that it's important for both parties, the elderly and the youngsters, to read the right of the youngsters. It's not like we just need to tell the elderly people that, okay, this is the right of the youngster, you have to abide by it. Even it's a lesson for the youngsters, and vice versa as well. That the elderly should somehow read the rights of how other people need to treat the elderly. And then this is a reminder that, okay, if that person needs to respect me, I should also try to be worthy of that respect. So it's a two-way thing that we, inshallah, both children and elders can benefit from the rights of the children, just the way both children and elders can benefit from the rights of the elderly. Nonetheless, the Imam says in the beginning of this, the right of the younger ones, he says, and the right of the youngster is to show him mercy, to train him, to teach him, to forgive him, to cover his defects, to be gentle with him, to assist him, to conceal his childish mistakes. And then the Imam is teaching us that why is that the case? Why should we be so forgiving and overlooking and gentle with youngsters? He says, for indeed this type of behavior is the cause of his repentance. So this is a point that in that first session we had on the birthday of Imam Hassan alayhi salam, I was saying that as a parent, as an elderly, we want to somehow train our children to move on the right path. Oftentimes, because of, again, the materialistic society we live in, we think our responsibility as parents is educational, financial, material. I need to get good clothes, I need to give a good house, I need to give a good education to my child. All of that is important. That is very good. That is necessary. But there is another aspect as well, that we want to raise our kids to be servants of Allah, to love the Ahlul Bayt, to value taqwa in their life. In a society that doesn't value taqwa, this is going to be hard. To make our children value material wealth is not going to be that hard, because everybody around them values material wealth. But to make them value purity and taqwa is going to be a bit of a challenge. We have in a hadith from the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, whoever trains a child, whoever does tarbiyah of a child until he says La ilaha illallah, Allah will not do hisab of this individual. This person basically on the Day of Judgment, their hisab is taken care of. So that idea of spiritually training children is so important, so valuable in the eyes of Allah. And so basically one of the important points here that is being kind of focused on is this idea of how gentleness and being gentle and overlooking the faults is a very appropriate way to interact with kids and youngsters. Youngsters at times, they don't have the maybe strength to put up with like harshness. You know, this is why, like for example, the tragedy of Karbala is so heartbreaking to us when we see how the children were treated. Inshallah, we'll make some points towards the end, even about Palestine today. It's so heartbreaking to see what's happening to all the children. But the idea is that, so if we have to rebuke our children, or we have to somehow guide our children, generally the way to do it is with love and with gentleness, and to somehow inspire them, be logical to them, with them, respect their freedom in an appropriate manner, of course. We have a hadith from Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, gentleness causes difficult matters to become easy and renders those matters that have hard causes to become easy. Meaning that like we have a goal in life. Let's say it's even not just with children. Let's say I'm interacting with other people and I want to convince them that this project is a good project to work on. If I am a gentle person, I am loving, I seek they get this feeling that I want what is in the best interest for them, they're going to be more inclined to listen to me and to kind of work with me. In that regard, one other aspect of like how this works with our children that I wanted to mention is that when it comes to inculcating the love of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam in our children, we want to also do that in this way. By somehow inspiring them, by doing it gently, by ourselves being a good role models, that our children look up to us and are inspired by our love of the Ahlul Bayt. Not that we are somehow forcing them that they have to do this, they have to do that, and they won't even see the benefit of it, the logic behind it. That's not gonna be as effective. For example, one of the things we could do is we could try to somehow talk to our children about the amazing qualities of the Ahlul Bayt, how their akhlaq was, how their taqwa was, how their values were, as opposed to the enemies of the Ahlul Bayt. Rather than just sending la'nat on the enemies of the Ahlul Bayt, it would be more effective to talk about what did those enemies do that was wrong. Why was Ali alayhi salam better than those people that took the right of Ali alayhi salam? Right? One example, for example, is the love that the Ahlul Bayt had for the people. If people are only to kind of realize that and think about that, this would be a very powerful and very attractive kind of tool for attracting them to the Ahlul Bayt. We have a verse of Quran that says that لَقَدْ جَاءَكُمْ رَسُولٌ مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ, talking about the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that there has come to you an apostle from among yourselves. At the end of Surah Tawbah, the 9th chapter of the Quran, then how does Allah describe the Prophet? He says, عَزِيزٌ عَلَيْهِ مَا عَنِتُّمْ حَرِيصٌ عَلَيْكُمْ بِالْمُؤْمِنِينَ رَؤُوفٌ رَحِيمٌ. The Prophet is very sad when you are going through difficulty. He's somebody who loves you so much that he is grievous or aggrieved when you are going through distress. He has a deep concern for you. The word haris is normally a negative word, that like somebody who is extremely greedy for the dunya is haris. But here Allah is describing the Prophet as haris, that he was so greedy to save us from the fire of hell, that he was a haris person in that sense. بِالْمُؤْمِنِينَ رَؤُوفٌ رَحِيمٌ. He is extremely kind and merciful to the mu'mineen, to the believers. Even a story in this regard, it's narrated about Amirul Mu'mineen Ali alayhi salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. That when he was the Khalifa, one of his companions, one of his Shia by the name of Rumayla was really sick one day. He felt very sick, he had a fever. On the day of Friday, he felt a little bit better from his sickness, so he thought, let me go to Namaz al-Jum'ah, let me pray behind Imam Ali alayhi salam. But when he was there, when the Imam started his sermon, again the fever came back and he started to feel very sick. And the Imam noticed that. So after the khutbah was finished, the Namaz al-Jum'ah was finished, Rumayla and Imam alayhi salam are talking to one another. And the Imam tells Rumayla that, "Oh Rumayla, I saw that you were very sick, you were like twitching, writhing in pain." And so Rumayla is explaining his sickness to the Imam. At that time the Imam says, this is a very important sentence. He says, "Oh Rumayla, there is not one believer that becomes sick except that we also become sick because of his sickness. A believer does not become sad except that we, the Imams, the Ahlul Bayt, we are also sad because of his sadness. He does not do dua except that we say Ameen at the end of his dua. And he is not quiet except that we are doing dua for him." So going back to my discussion about children, if we can somehow introduce Islam in this manner, that it is very logical, very practical, our Imams are people who exhibit these amazing qualities, they love us so much, then inshallah naturally our kids, and then beyond that, if we go out of our way to ourselves manifest that, abide by Islamic teachings, obey Allah in our life, value the Ahlul Bayt in our life, then our kids naturally, in most circumstances, kids would imitate their parents and take their parents as their role model, and inshallah that can be a very effective way of somehow abiding by these rights of the youngster. Again, I'll just pause for a moment. If anybody has any questions, I was open to taking any questions. Otherwise, I wanted to kind of end this and just make a few points about Palestine at the end, inshallah.
Kids have any questions?
Okay, so sallallahu alaihi